Let's join Pastor Don and Donna Long.
Hello, this is Pastor Don Long.
And I'm Pastor Donna Long.
And here we are for Grafted In. Usually our Grafted In broadcast has a portion that is on Jewish roots and then a portion that is on news from the Middle East.
That's right.
But for these weeks through the summer, we're going to be focusing in on the history of the Middle East, specifically the history of modern Israel. And in fact, I could call this Getting History Right. If you've learned your history in the last, 20 years in modern American school about any place, I'm not sure that it's accurate history, but we're going to talk about the state of Israel so that you can have some understanding about the issues that are involved in the Middle East, why it's important, and in fact, who's right. Because at the end of the day, there is a right and there is a wrong, and we need to understand the facts and not the hype and not the yelling and not the screaming. And certainly on our college campuses, it's very difficult to have a clear presentation because people don't want to hear it. So let me share an interesting fact with you. Do you know this fact, Donna, about Jerusalem?
Jerusalem is mentioned over 500 times in the Bible.
500 times in the Bible. So how many times is it mentioned in the Quran?
0. Nada.
That's just a little tidbit, but to get us started thinking about the history of the Middle East, when people say, well, Jerusalem is holy to three faiths, it's holy to Christianity and to Islam and to Judaism, but if we look at the Bible, as the Jews, it's mentioned 500 times. So we as Christians and Jews, we have a Bible, and Jerusalem is mentioned over 500 times in our holy book. So we can turn to the Muslim and say, in your holy book, the Quran, how many times is Jerusalem mentioned as your holy city?
That's right.
And as Donna said, it is 0. It is 0. Could there be a misunderstanding about some of the truths of the Middle East? So to begin with, we need to understand what I call the land grant to Israel. And it basically says this: all other nations of the world were created by an act of men, but Israel was created by an act of God.
That's right.
The United States, for example, on July 4th, we declared our independence. We created a nation. As men, we created a nation. And so through all the nations of the world. But Israel, historically, was created by an act of God. The royal land grant that was given to Abraham and his seed is an everlasting and an unconditional covenant.
That's right.
Donna, why don't you read for us Genesis chapter 13 there?
Genesis 13, verses 14 and 15 say, the Lord said to Abram, lift up your eyes from where you are and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever.
So that it's a forever grant.
That's right.
It's a record of God saying, Abraham, look as far as you can see, north, south, east, west. All the land that you see, I'm going to give you.
That's right.
And it's going to be your land and your offspring's land forever. Doesn't make any difference if somebody comes and occupies it. Doesn't make any difference if the Romans come and kick you out. It's your land. And I gave it to you forever. I say to people, if you got a problem with that, take it up with God.
That's right.
Don't take it up with the United Nations.
That's
now,
right.
Genesis 13, Donna, where did that take place?
That took place up on Alon Moray.
Yeah.
We were just there. We were just, if you had come with us, you would have seen. You would have looked out across the same land that Abram looked across. We stood there up on Alon Moray, and we actually looked out across that land ourselves.
So we could see the path that he would have come as he came from the Mesopotamian River Valley,
coming up.
and he came across the Jordan River, and came up through that valley we were looking at, and there we stood up at the tree on the top of the mountain there, and from Alon Moray you could see north, south, east, and west, and that was the place where God said,
that's right,
I give you this land.
That's right.
There's no record anywhere that God said to Muhammad, I give you land.
No, there isn't.
Not even in the Quran.
Not in the Quran, and that's what they should be going by.
They don't even have a record that Allah said, I give you the land.
They don't.
There's no record that Buddha gave the land. There's no record anywhere. But in the Holy Scriptures of the Jews and Christians, we have God going on record saying, of all the lands in the world, Abraham, I give you this land
That's right.
to you and your
Forever.
descendants forever. In Genesis 15, he further expands that. Why don't you read that for
He
us?
says, on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, to your descendants, I give this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates.
Wow, and we're going to look at
These
that.
are specific places.
Absolutely.
not
And in
abstract
fact,
at
you'll
all.
see a map in a few minutes, but the land that he says goes from the river of Egypt, that would be the Nile River.
That's right.
All the way up to the great river, the Euphrates, which is up in Iraq. So the land that God intended, and we'll talk about, was a big land. And finally, Genesis 17:8, read that one
It
for
says,
us.
the whole land of Canaan, where you are now, an alien, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you.
It's an everlasting possession.
That's right. Forever.
If there is a God in heaven,
That's right.
and if that God
there
has
is.
chosen to reveal his will and plan for planet Earth, it's very clear that one of his plans is that out of all of planet Earth,
That's right.
he has a people and he has a place,
That's right.
and he gave that place to that people.
That's right.
And in fact, later the prophets will say, woe to the nations that divide my land.
That's right.
Woe to the nations. That would include the United States.
would include the
If we're
United
party to anything that would attempt to divide the land of Israel.
That's right.
And we have abundant record that when you come against Israel and divide her land, bad things happen to your
That's
own
right,
nation.
'cause
We'll
you're
talk
coming
about that
against
later.
God himself.
And so I want to show you up on the screen a map. You'll look at it right now, and it's Israel during the reigns of King David and King Solomon. And so on the lower left of your screen, you see the River Nile, and in the upper right, you see the Euphrates River. All of that land was the kingdom of Israel during the reigns of David and Solomon.
That's right.
And now I want to show you a second map that shows you modern Israel and how it fits in that. Now, if you're looking at that map while I'm talking, you'll see that modern Israel is maybe 1/5 at
one
most
sliver of
the size of Israel during the reign of David and Solomon.
That's right.
All of that land belonged to them.
That's right.
That's quite amazing. And so the question that we raise is, who has controlled the Middle East? You know, it's amazing to me. Israel is this tiny little nation, Donna,
Yes.
surrounded by nations 10 times bigger. You know, Israel, the Jews they're less than 1% of humanity. Think about it.
That's right.
Less than 1% of humanity, and yet all the world is stirred up about this
that
little
one people
nation
group.
called Israel. And the question is, well, who's controlled the Middle East anyway?
That's right.
You know, I mean, well, you know, the Iraqis, Iraq wasn't always there.
No.
Well, the Lebanese weren't always there. The Saudis, you know, well, the Saudis weren't always there. So let's do a quick review of the history of the Middle East, okay? If we go back to the 7th century BCE, that's before the Common Era, we find that the Babylonian Empire controlled the Middle East. So if you were alive in the 7th century BCE, who's controlling all that? There'd be no fight about Israel, Iraq, Palestinians, Jordanians. None of them existed. We would find out that the Babylonian Empire had come in as an aggressor and taken over the entire Middle East. And you've read about that perhaps in your history books back in high school days, grammar school days, or even college days. The great Babylonian Empire controlled the whole Middle East.
That's right.
They were followed in the 6th century BCE by the Persian Empire.
That's right.
The Persian Empire, Persia no longer exists as a nation now. It's been replaced by the nation of Iran. But the Persian Empire controlled all of the Middle East. They stole it. They went and fought against the Babylonians and destroyed them. And now the Persian Empire becomes the controller of the entire Middle East. And then Alexander the Great, in a little place called Greece, decides that he wants to be a world ruler, and he is a genius. Alexander the Great is a military genius, and from this little place called Greece, he begins to expand his empire and literally comes against the mighty Persian Empire and destroys them. By the time he's 30 years old, Donna, he controlled the whole Middle East.
Amazing.
It was the Greek Empire in the 4th century BCE. And then that was followed by the Roman Empire. Alexander the Great died. His empire was split up among 3 of his generals. And to make a long story short, over in Italy, Rome began to grow as an empire, began to expand beyond Italy, took over the European subcontinent, and then began to move into the Middle East. So when we come into the 1st century BCE, we are in the period of the Roman Empire. And if you are a Christian and you open your Bible and you read the accounts in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Rome is the one that is in charge of what's going on at that point. So how did the Romans get in charge? Military conquest.
That's right.
They didn't buy it. They didn't negotiate for it. Through the power of their armies, the great Roman Empire came in and took over the area. Now, those nation states that were there would rebel against Rome. And one of those nation states that rebelled against Rome was Israel. You know, Israel had Roman governors appointed over them, and in Judea and Samaria, you know, that they had Roman procurators, and they were rebelling against that. You can read some of those rebellions in the book of Maccabees. Some of them took place later after the time of Jesus, Yeshua. There were always revolts against Rome. Why? We don't want the government from there that came in as conquerors.
That's right.
Taking over us.
That's right.
And so there was a great rebellion among the Jews against Rome.
That's right.
And by the way, they were successful.
Yes, they were.
They kicked the Romans out. Now, they didn't kick them out forever because Rome was bigger than the armies that were there. They defeated the Roman armies there, set up a Jewish empire, and then Rome came back with its mighty armies and descended into the Middle East and came against Jerusalem. And this time in the siege of Jerusalem in 70 AD,
Yes.
when Jerusalem fell on the 9th of Av, and those mighty Roman armies came in and said, we are going to put down these Jews once and forever. Isn't it interesting how many empires have tried to destroy the Jews?
That's right.
Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, some through assimilation, some through outright conquest, tried to destroy them. But Rome said, we've had it with these Jews and they're tied to the land.
That's right.
We've had it with these Jews who feel that the land is holy. We've had it with these Jews who feel the land is promised to them. And so Rome came in and decimated Israel, destroyed Jerusalem,
Destroyed the temple.
burned the whole city to the ground, destroyed the second temple.
That's right.
Everything, Jesus said not one stone
That's
would
right,
be
he
left.
talked
He
about
predicted
that. He
that.
predicted
That's
that.
exactly what happened. The temple was destroyed, and Rome erected a city that was to be a Roman city in its place, and they renamed the area. And guess what they named it? Palestina. Palestina, that's where the word Palestinian comes from.
That's right.
There was no Palestina before that. But the Romans said
There were no Palestinians.
there were no Palestinians.
They only came after it was
Right.
named.
So they said, we've had it with these Jews. We've had it with their attempt to have their own land. And they cast them and dispersed them all around the Roman Empire, renamed it, renamed Jerusalem. So there's no Jerusalem, there's no Israel, it's Palestinia. And that's where the name Palestinian came from.
That's right.
And so when you come into the 20th century in the 1900s and you say, well, who are the Palestinians? They're Jews and Arabs.
That's right.
Anybody who lived there, you
Was
were a
called a
Palestinian.
Palestinian.
In fact, during the British Mandate, if you were a Jew living in Jerusalem and you needed a passport, your passport was from Palestine. Palestine was both Jews and Arabs. And by the way, Christians. If you lived there, you were a Palestinian. So we don't even understand the term Palestinian We don't understand that there never was a Palestinian nation.
No.
There was never a Palestinian language.
That's right.
There was never a Palestinian capital.
No.
One of the early prime ministers of Israel said to Arafat, if the Palestinians were a people, what was their language?
That's
what
right.
was their capital? Where was the state? Where was their currency? What kind of, where's
Money,
the
that's right.
Palestinian
Where was
money?
the money?
It didn't exist.
No, it didn't.
Okay? When we come into the 7th century of AD, we find out that that's when there was the rise of the Islamic Empire.
That's right.
And Muhammad had a vision that Allah had told him to conquer the whole world.
That's right.
And he's going to take over the entire world. Much like the Babylonians were going to do, the Persians were going to do, the Greeks were going to do, the Romans were going to do. The Islamic Empire was destined to take over the whole world and succeeded in the 7th century, occupying the entire Middle East, all of northern Africa. They were coming up up through the Dardanelles into Europe on the south. They were coming up, trying to come up through Spain into Europe. That way, the Islamic Empire controlled the Middle East. And then we had the Crusaders in the 11th and 12th century, who said, we've got to get the Holy Land back. And so the Crusaders came and they fought against the Arabs and the Muslims. And in the 11th and 12th century, if you said, who controls the Middle East? Well, depends what century you're talking about.
That's right.
If you're in the 11th and 12th century, it would have been the Crusaders.
That's right.
And then we had the resurgence of the Arab Empire in the 14th century, followed by the great and mighty Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire came in and took over the Middle East in the 16th century. And the Ottoman Empire, based out of Turkey, okay, so it's based out of Turkey, controlled the whole Middle East for 400 years.
It's a long time.
That's a long time.
It's a long time.
The Ottoman Empire controlled the whole Middle East. When they controlled the Middle East for 400 years, right up into after World War I, the Ottoman Empire controlled over that. There was no Saudi Arabia. There was no Iran. There was no Iraq. There was no Syria. There was no Lebanon. There was no Israel. There was no Jordan.
That's right.
There were no nation states in the Middle East. For 400 years, it was the Ottoman Empire
That's right.
controlling the whole Middle East. And they controlled it for 400 years. Now, interesting, during that time that they controlled it, it would have been on up into the 1800s. So if we come into the period of time, 1850 to 1890, it's the latter half of the 19th century, Jewish people began buying land
That's right.
in Palestine.
That's right.
Now, why on earth would there be this resurgence of Jews buying land in the Ottoman Empire, but specifically in what is modern-day Israel? Because of what you read earlier, Donna.
That's right. Because it's
God said,
it's their land. He
it's
gave
your
it to
land
them.
for how long?
There's an eternal covenant forever. It's eternal.
The Jews,
Like you said, doesn't matter that the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Islamic, the Crusaders, the Arabs, the Ottoman, doesn't matter, they all came in and took over the land. What God said is, this is your land forever.
forever. Now, interesting. You know, when wars take place, people groups get moved from one place to another. We pick you up from this country, we put you in this country. You become a refugee, we put you here, we put you here, put you here.
That's right.
In most cases, refugees don't go back to their homeland. They adopt where they're living and
That's
stay
right.
there.
That's right.
You
They just blend in and
you don't
assimilate into
find,
their
you know,
surroundings.
French people who are living in the United States just can't wait to get back to France.
Nope.
That every year they say, next year back to Paris, next year back to
That's right.
Paris.
Yep.
But the one people group in the
That's right.
entire planet
That's right.
that have always, since they've been in existence,
That's right.
have always said we belong in Israel are the Jews.
That's right.
And they always say in Passover, at the end of the service,
That's right.
whether you're a
That's right.
Russian Jew, an American Jew, an Argentinian Jew, whether you're living in India as a Jew,
Ethiopian
an
Jew.
Ethiopian Jew, at the end of Passover they say, next year in Jerusalem. That people group, even though the Romans kicked them out and spread them all over the world, century after century
They have
after
maintained
century,
their identity as a
from
people.
generation to generation to generation, said, next year in Jerusalem. And what were they saying? They were saying that Israel is ours.
That's right.
God gave it to us. It's
right.
always been ours. We don't care if you kicked us out. It belongs to us.
That's right.
So in the 1850s, Jewish people began buying land. Now that's the key word. They were buying land
right.
in their own home country.
That's right.
That would be like somebody came in, a foreign power, kicked you out of your home in Fitchburg, whatever else, and then
Land that you owned.
land that you owned, kicked you off it, confiscated it, and then 20 years later put that land up for sale,
And you came to
you
buy
went
it.
back and you rebought the land that was rightfully
That was already
yours.
yours.
You
That's
didn't
right.
go in and say, it's mine, I want it. You said, I am willing to buy
buy
the
it.
land you
That's right.
stole from me.
That's right.
And Jews were buying land
That's right.
in the 1850s. They started through the 1890s. Now, notice this. At the same time, 1850 to
That's right.
1890, the United States government was taking
That's right.
land from the Indians.
That's right. That's right.
We were stealing land from the Indians. You know, there's over 249 treaties our government made with the Indians that we broke.
It broke.
The white man's word doesn't count in those times.
That's right.
We were stealing land. We went down in Georgia, kicked the Cherokee Indians out, took their land so white people could settle it, forced the Cherokees to move out to Oklahoma. All through the tribal lands, we were taking land at the same time that Jews were buying land. You know, nothing gets me more irritated than when people say, oh, the Jews took land from the Arabs.
No, they did not.
That is a bald-faced lie.
That's right.
What you should say is the white Americans were taking land from the Indians, but at the same time, Jews were buying the land in the Ottoman Empire. Well, that's a history they don't teach in school, but that is a history.
true.
So when you look at the land that right now where there's so-called settlements, where there's communities that are disputed, excuse me, the Jews did not take the land
No, they did
from
not.
anybody. We just got back from there. We were up in those mountaintops
Yes, we
where
were.
nobody was living there.
Nobody.
Empty, barren hilltops.
That's right.
That the Jews would buy the land and build up farm, build a community,
That's right.
build things there. And now the world says they're occupiers. How can you be an occupier of land you bought?
That's right. You can't be.
It is an absolute propaganda lie going on in our media, in our college campuses, going around from people who don't have eyes to just get on the internet and find out the land that the Jews have, they bought.
They bought it.
My goodness, we can keep going on that stuff. Well, at the end of World War I, Turkey lined up with the wrong powers. Turkey got on the line, lined up with Germany, came against the British, the French, and the Americans. And at the end of World War I, what happens when you have a world war and the winners win, the others say, okay, we concede, we sign a treaty. What happens? Most of those treaties, you lose everything you had.
That's right.
You know, Germany at the end of World War I, Japan at the end of World War II. You sign what's called an unconditional treaty. We started the war, we went against you, we lost the war, we have no rights.
That's right.
Okay? And usually, historically, what happened in the 20th century is then the land is divided among the winners.
Among the winners, that's right.
Excuse me, you came, you attacked us, you lost, and so now your so-called territories, you know, you still have your motherland, but your territories aren't yours anymore. You got those territories earlier in your history through war, and now you've lost them through war, and we are going to decide what to do.
That's right.
So after World War I, and the League of Nations got together, and it actually started at a conference called San Remo. Look it up, Google it, San Remo. That after World War I, the Allies divided up the Middle East, because we're talking about who's controlled the Middle East. Now remember, 400 years.
That's right.
That's longer than this nation's been in existence.
That's right.
400 years The Ottoman Empire controlled all of the Middle East. They did not develop the land. They did not develop nation states. They did not develop the people groups. They controlled the entire Middle East. At the end of World War I, they've lost the Middle East.
That's right.
And the Allies divide the Middle East into what's called mandates, French and British mandates. And what they decided to do was to carve up the Middle East, and the mandate said this: the French people, you're going to have control of this area of the Middle East, and you're going to teach them how to become nations.
That's right.
We can't just create a nation. They don't know how to be a nation.
That's right.
So we're going to take the nation of France, we're going to give you this section of land, and you create nation states there, and you develop them, and then when they're ready, you can develop nation states. And so the French were given the land that is now Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq were given to the French. It was a French mandate. There was no Syria, there was no Lebanon, there was no Iraq.
That's right.
Okay? And the British were given what's called the British Mandate, and they were given this part of land we're going to be talking about next week, that they were to control and they were to develop. And one of the things about the British Mandate was this: they were to develop a national homeland for the Jews.
That's right.
That's what they were to do. They were to develop a homeland for the Jews. That's the British Mandate. Now you say, well, they didn't have a right to do that. Well, listen. If Israel didn't have a right to be created, neither did Iraq, neither did Iran, neither did Jordan, neither did Saudi Arabia. None of those nations existed.
That's right.
They were all created
After World
by these mandates. That's how they were created.
That's right.
And you can't say Israel has no
So
right to
why is
exist.
only Israel the one that's being disputed all the time?
Why?
Yes,
Why is it that people dispute
million-dollar
Israel?
question.
You know, it's a pretty amazing question to ask.
Yes, it is.
But when we look at it, Britain and France were given 6 million square miles to divide up.
Yeah.
And how that division took place is what we're going to talk about next week. Because until you understand it, you don't understand what's going on in the Middle East. Well, this is Pastor Don and
Pastor Donna.
And we have been delighted to have you with us
Yes.
today on Grafted In. And join us next week. Get some friends, tune in as we continue to study the history of the Middle East so you can understand what's going on in the world today.